We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard.
3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff.
Bush is shuttle engines as such. It is simply that the Americans were wanting to prove the new computer software that they've now got in the shuttle orbiter.
So you're confident the 22 seconds to prove the computer will mean that the engines will work?
Oh yes, they've worked very well on the previous missions.
So you are also an expert in Soviet space technology. What will both the Soviets and the Chinese be looking for out of this mission if it eventually gets off the ground in October?
Basically, the Russians will be watching with interest, but they've got their own shuttle program going on independently, which does bear some resemblance to the American shuttle, but they've used a totally different design approach.
Now, your first newspaper item on this comes from, it's actually down on page 7 in the Times.
Yes.
Now, what do you think about this? It talks about the fact that the Discovery launch must go without a hitch, otherwise the future of manned space missions will be jeopardised for good.
I think for good is a slight exaggeration, but certainly if there were to be another catastrophic loss of a shuttle orbiter like Challenger 2 years ago, then we can probably forget American manned space missions for the rest of the century.
There was a fault, of course, before the test yesterday, wasn't there?
Yes, but the American engineers seem perfectly happy that it's something that they can correct before the flight itself.
Still on space, and your second story in The Independent is about a setback for the Soviet space project.
Yes, this is more on the human side than the technological side. The Russians had 2 pilots, flight proven, ready to fly their first manned space shuttle mission. And one of these 2 men, Levchenko, died on Saturday.
He died on Saturday, and it was a massive tumour, wasn't it?
Yes, it was, according to the Moscow reports, it was a brain tumour, completely unconnected with his space flight in December.
Completely unconnected with space flight. Right, now your next story, moving on to The Guardian, and a little follow-on to the story that's been in the news, and it's a tiny story, the source of the seal plague sought. This is the seal plague that's killing seals in the North Sea. Yes,
it's rather a hobby horse of mine that people tend not to follow disasters as they occur in the animal kingdom as much as they do in the human world. There are plenty of resources put into research on the medical side for human work, but the animals can come and go and very few people seem to take any notice.
Certainly seem to be taking a bit of notice of this one now. Now you move on to a story in the Daily Mail about Ken Livingstone attacking a Labour borough.
Yes, I've picked this out simply because I feel it's typical of the way that politicians tend to exaggerate things. How anybody with any credibility can compare a London borough with the Pol Pot regime, which instigated genocide, I just cannot see. Politicians' eye for a headline, though. Oh, yes, of course.
And moving on now to a story in the Sun newspaper, one of the great British soaps.
Yes, I picked this for 2 reasons. First of all, I'm not sure how good news the media itself is. Also, this raises the question as to whether newspapers should actually reveal storylines in advance of programmes going out.
What do you think?
I think there should be an embargo on the storyline until the programme is actually transmitted.
And what do you think of the idea that after this rape on Cathy Beale, her husband, is ditching her? What do you think about that? As a storyline for a soap opera?
As a storyline, then I think the idea is to bring out all the problems within a family, the tensions created by a rape. But personally, I think that Pete, in quotation marks, should have stood by Cathy.
Philip Clark, thank you for coming in this morning.
Thank you very much.
Pamela, current project being jointly funded by the European Space Agency and NASA. The satellites, named SOHO and Cluster, will examine the radiation emitted by the Sun and the effect that this has on the Earth.
The Sun is like a huge cauldron of nuclear energy, a continuous nuclear chain reaction. It emits not only heat and light, but also vast amounts of protons and electrons, the very building blocks of matter. These particles are attracted to Earth by its magnetic field. They can severely affect radio and television reception and are also responsible for the lights in the Arctic sky, known as Aurora Borealis. The new project has two parts. One craft, called SOHO, or Solar Oscillation and Heliospheric Observatory, will move to a fixed point between the Earth and the Sun and observe the sun hits the wind. Meanwhile, a group of 4 satellites, called Cluster, will circle the Earth in tight formation, the effect of the wind as it reaches us.
We're joined now by Dr. Mike Cruz, who's in charge of the British end of this mission to the Sun. Is it really worth spending £76 million on this?
Well, it is, Kirsty, because the Sun is vital to almost every aspect of human life, and there are several puzzles that scientists haven't unravelled yet. The energy generation in the centre of the Sun, the sort of very dramatic things that we've seen happening in the outer layers, which are very, very hot, and we don't understand how those are heating temperatures. And lastly, the transmission of this hot plasma solar wind to the Earth and its interaction with the Earth's magnetic field. So there are things that scientists really don't understand about it, and since we depend on it actually, it's a very important scientific mission.
Depending on it for what, though? What use will the information be put to?
The use is going to be a long-term use in understanding things, as we've seen, to do with the interruption of radio communications and those aspects which depend crucially on the ionized layers around the Earth. But you know, there are many aspects of life, we've seen it recently with the ozone hole, where scientists need to understand how the Earth works as a system and how the Sun interacts with it if we're to be able to monitor and understand the processes that are going on all around us.
Why can we afford to participate in this and we've just recently abandoned the hotel project?
Well, the two are really rather distinct because the planning for this has been going on for some while, for over 2 years. And what has been announced recently is the fact that the UK is able to fund the scientists in universities and research establishments who've been successful in getting experiments accepted against very stiff competition on these missions. And that money comes from essentially the Department of Education and Science, and it's there to support basic scientific research in universities. And that there's never any question really of that being available for the HOTOL project, which is funded by a completely different sort of ministry.
Is it crucial for us to be involved in the European Space Agency at the moment? If we don't get in now, will we not get in later?
Yes, we are involved in the European Space Agency, and that is really a central part of our space programme in the UK. British scientists have always done very well in bidding in these competitions because they actually design and make very fine instruments, and Europe recognises that. So the European Space Agency is absolutely vital to us, as is NASA. We have very good relations with them too, and of course they're participants in this project.
So that we're not going to be sending these satellites till mid-1990s. When will we start to get information back?
I think within a few months of their launch, in fact, but the real work will come out, the real understanding will come out in years following that, between 1995 and the end of that decade.
Well, Dr. Michael Cruz, we wish you all the best in the programme. John.
Breakfast time tomorrow morning, but the expert
launched the Cavant astronomy satellite last year. The launch went well, but as Cavant approached the Mir space station for a space link-up, things started to go wrong. The second attempt to dock Cavant to the bigger space station was only a partial success. A piece of plastic blocked the link-up. Soviet cosmonauts had to carry out a 3-hour spacewalk to clear the docking mechanism. In April, the engines that carried Cavant to the space station undocked, leaving behind the astronomy module. Then the huge engine block, 20 feet long and weighing about 9 tons, started to fall to Earth. At its headquarters, deep inside Cheyenne Mountain in Colorado, the US Space Command has been tracking the engine unit's progress since then. They say it will probably come down along these orbits, sometime early tomorrow morning. Estimates are uncertain, but if it comes down exactly when they think it will, debris could land in South America. 15 years ago, fuel tanks from a Soviet rocket landed in New Zealand, and similar tanks from Cavant could re-enter without burning up. Experts are increasingly concerned about the million bits of space junk now in orbit, more than 50 of them containing radioactive materials. The nuclear-powered Soviet spy satellite, Cosmos 1900, is already falling to Earth and will re-enter in October.
For the latest news, we're going over to Colonel Jim Moore of America's Space Command, which has been tracking the rocket's fall to Earth. Colonel Moore, what's your latest information on where and when the debris is likely to come down?
Sandy, the latest information from the Space Surveillance Center indicates that the re-entry will take place sometime shortly after 0600 Greenwich Mean Time tomorrow morning, and that would put the re-entry into the atmosphere somewhere along a line just south of the Hawaiian Islands in the Pacific Ocean.
No risk, you think, that it will come down over land?
At this point, the odds against it coming down specifically over land are very slim indeed. Even with the estimate that we had earlier today, which was approximately 0700 Greenwich time, that meant it might be somewhere over the southern tip of South America. But that's a very narrow area, as you're aware. And in all likelihood, the greater chance would be it would come down somewhere in either the southern Pacific Ocean or the southern Atlantic Ocean.
Colonel Moore, thank you very much indeed.
The shuttle actually got hit in a window with a flake of paint, which cracked it. And the Soviet cosmonauts in Salyut 7 were doing, quite by coincidence, an evacuation exercise when they had a realistic crack on the window, and that was a micrometeorite, or actually a piece of paint. So it actually gave an added touch of realism to the event.
It appears to make them very, very vulnerable. What can you do if you're up there about that kind of flying debris?
Well, the Americans are actually actively going through a systematic program of trying to clear up and catalogue space of what is going up there at the present time. They would like to put a space-based radar up there eventually.
Now, what about this nuclear one that's up there? That does seem very serious. It's got tons and tons of uranium on board.
Not exactly tons and tons. The actual uranium content we think is about 100 kilos. The actual satellite itself weighs about 9 tons. That at the present time is coming down around October the 19th.
And most of us presumably hope it's not going to be in our backyards. I mean, that's presumably what all countries are hoping.
Well, we can't tell at this stage where it is going to come down. We can only do that literally about 1 or 2 orbits beforehand.
And we just have to sit and wait?
We have to sit and wait.
Max, thanks for joining us this morning.
Thank you.
Far cry from the days of Dan Dare, isn't it, Max? Anyway,
Britain's biggest 1989 price war today by offering children a week at Disney World in Florida for £29. Britons are already paying less to go on holiday than other Europeans. A fortnight on Portugal's Algarve coast in September would cost a British holidaymaker £546. It would cost a Dutch tourist about £875 and a Belgian more than £950. But it may not last. A report from Anne Perkins of ITN's Channel 4 News.
Every year, the Shans, the Calverts and the Reinhardts go on holiday to somewhere like the Hotel Las Ocas in Benidorm. The Shans book through one of the biggest British tour operators, and they pay £318 each for a fortnight. The Calverts, with a French tour operator, pay £400 each for exactly the same holiday. And according to today's report, the Reinhardts could pay anything up to £500.
We think that the industry in the UK is simply getting a better deal out of the hotels in Europe for their customers.
At the Hotel Las Ocas, the Shans have the same room and the same view as the Calverts next door, paying £82 more. Not surprisingly, the Shans reckon they're getting a good deal.
Yes, I do, most certainly. It's value, you're getting good value. Food's good, everything about it's good.
The Shans get their suntan for less than the Calverts because the British market's so competitive. With Thomson's offering 2 weeks for the price of one in summer, first come first served, the battle for the beaches is still raging. But for how much longer, when the trend is for fewer, bigger companies, mergers like Thomson's with Horizon?
Merger between the number 1 company and the number 3 company could create a situation where they are able to lead on prices and to get prices up.
It's not going to make any difference to the price of the holiday. The British market is extremely competitive and will continue to be. And I don't think the merger of Thomson Horizon is going to make any difference to that.
But observers fear it's the very ferocity of the competition which will drive tour operators out of business. And in Britain, as in the rest of Europe, just a few control the market. Then everyone could end up paying as much as the Germans.
crashed onto the spectators. A state official said it was feared that 31 people had died, 100 others were injured. It happened at an air base at Ramstein, the headquarters of the United States Air Force in Europe. The jets involved were two-seater ground attack aircraft, the MB339A. This report from David Loyne in London.
The accident happened as the Italian Air Force equivalent of our Red Arrows, the Frecce Tricolori team, were completing a manoeuvre. After rising spectacularly, the planes divided into two groups. The disaster happened as they tried to cross just 200 feet from the ground. One of the planes ploughed into a crowd of spectators. Another crashed into the runway and burst into flames close to the VIP stand. A third plane was dragged to the ground with the two that collided. The MB339A trainer is capable of doing 500 miles an hour. The combined closing speed of the collision is believed to have killed the pilots and sent wreckage across the airfield. West German rescue workers joined American soldiers and airmen to cope with a series of fires which broke out. Ambulances with special burns equipment have been ferrying injured survivors to hospital. But many spectators were beyond help. There'd been concern about safety before the air show. Local politicians and environmental groups had demanded the show should be cancelled. One politician accused the Americans of arrogance in letting the show go ahead.
A plane has also crashed at an air show in Belgium. It happened at the Kleine Breugel base, 70 miles northeast of Brussels. The plane, belonging to the Finland's Air Force, lost control during formation flying with another Finnish aircraft. The pilot was killed. It was a second fatal crash at an air show in Belgium in recent weeks.
Destroyed. The pilots and at least 30 spectators are known to have died. Over 100 others in the crowd were injured. Most were American servicemen and their families, others German civilians. Amid the panic, destruction. Many of the injured suffered severe burns. Spectators ran to help as emergency vehicles raced to the scene. It's now emerged that many locals had demanded the cancellation of this air show because of public concern about low-level flying. The injured lay scattered across the airfield, receiving emergency aid from those at the scene. The German Defence Minister had only last month reduced the number of such flights in response to the strength of public opinion. Officials at the local hospitals here described the scene as a madhouse. It's now thought likely the air show will be cancelled in future years.
It's the worst air display disaster involving spectators ever. 60 of the injured are said to have life-threatening burns. Most of the casualties were among spectators at the US Air Force base at Ramstein, which was packed for the annual show. Local people have been calling for the show to be banned because of concern over low-flying exercises.
It was intended as a demonstration of precision flying by the Italian Air Force. A formation of jets, 10 in all, divided into 3 groups and were meant to pass within feet of each other in opposite directions. Instead, they were heading for disaster. From another angle, the complex maneuver can be seen again, with one pilot peeling off from the main group of aircraft, returning to the formation at high speed to complete the display. His plane catapulted into hundreds of spectators. People fled for their lives as burning debris and aircraft wreckage crashed into the crowds. Amid the panic that followed, destruction. Parked cars ablaze after the impact. Spectators and airbase personnel ran to help the injured and dying, and emergency vehicles raced to the scene. Of the 200,000 people there, most of the dead and injured were either American servicemen and their families or German civilians. A helicopter was almost immediately on the scene, transferring the casualties to local hospitals. Many of the 500 injured are said to be in a very critical condition, mainly suffering from severe burns and impact wounds. As the toll of the injured and dead is still being counted tonight, it's now emerged that many locals had demanded the cancellation of this air show because of public concern about low-level flying.
The Frecce Tricolori are Italy's equivalent of the Red Arrows, flying 10 two-seater advanced training aircraft. The heart sequence is one of the most difficult aerobatic manoeuvres they perform, where the planes split up at around 10,000 feet into two groups and a singleton. They loop away from and then towards each other to cross in front of the spectators. Here the singleton plane comes in towards the crowd, supposedly to pass above or below the two converging formations. From a different angle, the approaching aircraft which is hit breaks up and crashes into the airfield, taking another plane with it. In slow motion, it appears the singleton attempts too late to gain height. And from the side angle, it seems that the two formations have passed when the solo plane hits. The manoeuvre starts well with a good break at the top of the climb. The singleton flies away and starts to loop in towards the runway at about 90 degrees. All appears mechanically sound, and it flies in straight and level, although it does seem that for some reason its wheels are down. The formation lining up on the left-hand side of the runway runs in on its passing approach. The singleton will now have visual contact with it. All 10 aircraft are now committed to their passing runs, the two formations separated only by the width of the runway. A split second from the collision, and it's too late now for anyone to do anything. The gap between the aircraft is not enough. The moment of impact, and the singleton hurtles towards the crowd.
One could see the two formations and the single aeroplane, and it appears that the single aeroplane coincided with one of the formations on the crossover maneuver.
Is the maneuver you saw a particularly dangerous one?
Well, I don't think it's dangerous, provided the timing is correct and provided the margins are adequate. One can only assume that the timing went wrong and the margins were just not there, but apart from that, one cannot say why.
Pilots are flying aircraft to the limits of handling and performance. When they're involved in formation flying, when they're involved in demonstration flying, they're very skillful pilots, they're very experienced, they're well disciplined, and they are well controlled by the Flying Control Committee, who will lay down minimum altitudes and other things to do everything possible to make it as safe as it can be.
The display team have one of the finest records and reputations for aerobatic flying in the world, performing at air shows since 1930. Only 3 times before in the last 10 years have members of the team been killed in air crashes. One of them gave his own life to steer his doomed plane away from crowds at Mildenhall in Suffolk. Tonight, as the inquiries start, the future of the team and future displays like theirs are under review across Europe.
There's a special number for people worried about relatives or friends at the crash. It's 010 49 637 147 2381. That's 010 49 637 147 2381. New safety laws for air shows in Britain were agreed just 2 months ago. They'll come into effect in January. The number of displays has risen rapidly since the war, and with it the number of deaths. 30 people died when a de Havilland jet crashed at Farnborough in 1952. 16 years later, at the same show, a French plane crashed, killing 6. In 1980, at Biggin Hill, a Second World War Douglas bomber disintegrated. 7 people died. Mannheim, Germany, 1982, a Chinook helicopter carrying parachutists crashed. 46 were killed. In May this year, another Chinook accident at Hanover. 2 people died. And the following month, 3 died when a French Airbus crashed at a show in Mulhouse. 133 people survived. There was another airshow tragedy today. A pilot died in Belgium when his plane crashed as he was performing a series of aerobatics at the Kleine Brogel Air Base near Brussels. The plane, a Finnish military training aircraft called a Redigo, failed to come out of a spin and dived to the ground. Now for the rest of the news. The Foreign Office diplomat, Mr. David Reddaway, has flown back to Britain.
3 air shows.
The forensic scientists yet to disturb the evidence of this dreadful disaster, haunting remnants here of the Sunday afternoon outing that ended in horror. They have convened a board of officers here to carry out a preliminary inquiry into this crash, but the unofficial but widely held view is that pilot error was to blame. Opponents of the air show, out with their placards yesterday, had long feared such an accident as this. The American ambassador and the West German defense minister joined, they said in sorrow, faced the press.
We must now work together to improve safety at these air shows.
The defense minister, though, announced a ban on future shows.
My first decision is to cancel the air show the end of September of the Luftwaffe in Lechfeld.
In the hospitals, meanwhile, they continue to treat the burned, many still critically ill. And at the airbase, they work to trace the missing and to identify some of the dead. Dead remembered tonight in chapels around the country. Vernon Mann, ITN, West Germany.
This amateur video of the Frecce Tricolore performing at RAF Fairford shows quite clearly what should have happened during the fatal display in Germany yesterday, and there can now be no doubt that it was a matter of bad timing. The single plane reaches the intersection from the left more than 2 seconds after the two formations have passed through, and all the planes pull up to reform at 10,000 feet. In slow motion, it can be seen that the safety margins are generous. The runway separates the two formations, the singleton comes in later and higher at the intersection. Yesterday, the single plane arrived at the same time and height. Despite the German ban, next weekend sees the start of Britain's biggest air show at Farnborough, before new safety laws are introduced here. By next January, the Civil Aviation Authority will take overall control of all large British air shows. They'll ensure that all pilots participating in them are acceptably qualified for display work, and they'll check out historic aircraft and their air crews, and they'll also ensure that the show organisers comply with spectator safety standards.
I think that these sort of shows can be conducted in a manner which reduces the danger to the public to an absolute minimum. Clearly, when airplanes fly over the public, the world is never going to be 100% safe, but it can.
Britain's crack aerobatic team, the Red 2 air shows today, aware that the job is dangerous but controllable. The public appears to have confidence in safety regulations here. Thousands turned out to watch the displays.
The runway is quite a way away, and they do try and keep it over that side, so I mean, I suppose you take the chance.
With all the accidents that have gone on in the other parts of the world has made us much more aware, and we have a conscience in our country of doing things. We wouldn't be daredevils over this kind of thing ever.
But the Red Arrow's pilots now fear some of their more spectacular acts could be stopped.
Well, as far as we're concerned, it's absolutely safe because we strive to make sure that the whole display is designed with the safety of spectators in mind, as well as providing something of interest for them to watch.
And the prestige of those displays worldwide means the Red Arrows are unlikely to be disbanded.